Welcome to your daily dose of Sunday School, episode 116. We are finishing up chapter 6 of R.C. Sproul's Reason to Believe, entitled, I Don't Need Religion. This whole chapter is all about looking at humanism versus grace. Humanism says that man is basically good. We said, no, that is not true, and Scripture teaches otherwise, and that seems to reflect more of reality. So therefore, we cannot earn our way to heaven, as many people assume. But then some will say, okay, why are we held responsible if we cannot work our way to heaven? But we saw, okay, we're held responsible because we act freely according to our desires. Our desires are fallen, and so we don't desire the things of God. So we're held accountable to that. So that leads to the question of, well, isn't it Adam's sin that led us to be fallen? Why are we held responsible if it's a result of something Adam did? And so the biblical idea is that Adam is our covenant head. He's our representative. But we like to pick our own representatives. And we would say, well, R.C. Sproul makes this comment, kind of clever, no condemnation without representation. We want to pick our own representatives, but even when we pick our own representatives, doesn't mean we are well represented. There are people who voted for George W. Bush, and look back and are like, man, we're still in wars in Afghanistan. People who voted for Barack Obama that say, man, he just got us into more wars than Bush after he talked about peace and stuff. And then he used IRS against his enemies. And they're disappointed in that choice they made. So, these are people who were, at the time, they thought they were making a great choice. This is a great representative of them. And then they don't represent what they want very well at all. We see that all the time. And so if we barely ever pick a representative that does a decent job of representing us, why should we think that we would do better than God? So God picked our representative, and he picked a perfect one. Now, he's also the natural choice because as the first human, he represents every human that comes after him. But we just need to set aside the pretense that we would have done a better job picking our representative. So a follow-up question coming after this is, why do I need grace? And this more has to do with the fact that not so much that the average American doesn't see the need for grace, but that they think it should. They assume that there's grace there, no matter what, for everybody. As soon as any famous person dies, everybody starts assuming they're in heaven, no matter what their life looked like. Now, this reveals that we do not have the same priorities as God. God values His holiness, His glory supremely. We don't. We have other values, and they're fallen values, they're sinful values. So our judgment here is very corrupt. If you were given the option to make 10 rules for every human being on the planet, how well would those rules reflect the 10 Commandments? See, our priorities are not God's, and that is an aspect of our fallenness. And so we don't see how far we are from the the mind of God. We don't see how far we are from honoring God. The two greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then love your neighbor as yourself. If we kept these two great commandments, then the world would be perfect. There would be no injustice, no wrong done to anyone. But think about what that greatest commandment says. Loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Have you ever done that for 10 minutes? And yet Jesus says that's the first and greatest commandment. So how far are we from actually doing what's right? The slightest sin, things that we don't consider important at all, violate what Jesus calls the greatest commandment. Therefore, we cannot just expect to go to heaven. We need God's grace. But then we assume that God will just give grace to every human being. But see, the problem is grace isn't justice. Justice is the sort of thing that can be demanded. Grace, by its very nature, we cannot demand that God show grace to us. You see, we don't have to. It's not about our efforts. And yet, God freely offers us grace. We can receive His grace, rely on His grace, and He will save us. But we can't say, oh, you have to show grace to every person, even those who have rejected His grace. It doesn't make sense.